The first in this rogues gallery is Alfani, which is sold at Macy's. This is one I have not sold before. A lot of the brands on this list I have actually sold before, made some money, not a lot of money. This is one I haven't. This is up there as contender for maybe top spot, top bottom dog on this whole list. I don't touch it ever. There are circumstances in which I will touch some of these brands. At the end of the video, I will go over what those scenarios are, but Alfani, I just strictly avoid. Next is MERONA, which is really close to Alfani in terms of its desirability for resale. And these are bad resale brands. These are not necessarily bad quality clothing brands, although yes, they are. MERONA is sold at Target. The resale value is about as low as you can get for a brand that has major name recognition. Faded Glory is sold at Walmart. It's a really terrible brand. I thought it was one of the worst. It is really, really bad, but actually looking into it a little bit before shooting the video, I was surprised there were a couple categories within Faded Glory that are doing pretty well. Vintage denim is performing quite well, and cargo shorts, especially camouflage pattern cargo shorts, are doing great. Camo cargo shorts close to 100% sell through on Faded Glory, which is kind of a surprise, and the prices are pretty good too, and this tends to be the case with kind of bad brands, is for some reason camo pattern can carry it over the top. Otherwise, I would just completely avoid it. Also worth noting, these are not the 20 worst, these are just 20 of the worst. Apartment 9 is sold at Kohl's. It's mostly really plain looking dress shirts. Never even tried to sell it. There's really nothing that recommends it, and the sell-through numbers are terrible. VANHEUSEN is one of the most common brands, bad brands that you'll find. You just see it everywhere in thrift stores. VANHEUSEN is owned by the same company that owns Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, and interestingly Michael Kors. I don't know where they distribute it, but they must just be going door to door and handing it to people free. It's so common. You'll mostly find dress shirts. You also find a ton of t-shirts, a ton of polo shirts. It's all crap, and I don't sell it. Croft & Barrow, also sold at Kohl's. They do, I think, more women's clothing than men's clothing, but they also do men's clothing, and it's all the same garbage. I mean, all of these brands, all this clothing is basically interchangeable. It simply is not good. I have sold it before. You find it new with tags every once in a while. In fact, for some reason, I feel like you find Croft & Barrow new with tags more often than a lot of these brands. Structure is no longer being made. It was sold at Sears. I think they had department stores, like outlet stores too, when they were still around. It must have been really popular at one time because the thrift stores are riddled with it. There is an infestation of structure, and for the most part, it's just kind of boring looking. I think they do a few sort of Y2K looking pieces, which might be an interesting avenue to pursue. International Concepts, Inc., INC, will trip you up if you're a newer reseller. I know that it did me, because they make really like hideously tacky clothing that looks strange. They just put weird baubles and tassels and stuff on their shirts, and it can kind of trick you into thinking that it's something special. It never is. It's one of the brands that breaks the rule that typically is fairly hard and fast, ugly sells on eBay. Massimo, I was under the impression, was sold at Target. Apparently not anymore. As of 2019, Target has washed its hands of Massimo because of the college admissions scandal that the founder of Massimo was apparently involved in. He bribed some college a bunch of money for his kid to get admitted, got caught. Target said goodbye. If you go to the Target website, you can't find any Massimo products now. I don't know if it's still being manufactured. I assume that it is, but this is just absolute garbage. There is vintage Massimo. I think there's vintage MERONA also, but That's not the stuff that you're typically going to find. The stuff that you are typically going to find, you should avoid. George, I have taken a lot of shots at in my videos. Another one that you see everywhere. I was not aware until doing a little bit of poking around on the internet, is apparently a British brand. It was originally designed or produced or manufactured or distributed by Asda, which is one of the big supermarket chains in the UK. And it's distributed in the United States by Walmart, which explains its ubiquity. It has close to no resale value, really low quality, visually boring clothing. Visually boring is not necessarily a bar to resale value. Like this pair of shorts sitting in front of me on this table couldn't be more visually boring and plain, but I sold these for 37 bucks recently, and they sold within 24 hours. The brand is Buck Mason. Kirkland, we all know, is the house brand of Costco. Kirkland is a private labeling thing, so they will hire third-party known companies to manufacture a bunch of stuff for them, and then they'll put the Kirkland logo on it. So the Kirkland clothing may have been manufactured by a bunch of different companies. I always get tripped up by their jeans because they look like vintage Levi's until you see the Kirkland logo. And same with the slacks. They look like vintage, you know, made in Europe slacks. I don't know who makes them, but the resale value is quite low. I have sold Kirkland from time to time. New with tags can do okay, and I've sold Kirkland cashmere. Again, I'll talk about this at the end of the video more. Kenneth Cole is technically designer clothing. It's sold a bunch of different places, and the quality is really low. There's no prestige attached to, certainly like the more common Kenneth Cole lines. I'm not an expert when it comes to fashion. Maybe there is some Kenneth Cole stuff that is worth a lot, but the stuff that you're gonna find, like Kenneth Cole Reaction, is mostly trash for resale. Beverly Hills Polo Club. I don't want to be libelous, so I will say that it was inspired by the spirit of Ralph Lauren. It has close to zero resale value. I don't think I've ever picked it up. The sell-through numbers are dismal. There is no light at the end of the Beverly Hills Polo tunnel that I can see. Maybe someone in the chat has made money selling it. I'm sure people have made money, again, selling all of these brands. I just tend to avoid them. US Polo Association, very close to Beverly Hills Polo Club, very close to Ralph Lauren. In fact, too close for comfort by Ralph Lauren's estimation. They have sued the US Polo Association many times, and finally won. They won some settlement of, I think, $31 million. I thought it was just a clothing brand. Apparently, US Polo Association clothing is manufactured by the USPA, the United States Polo Association, the governing body of the sport of polo in the United States. I didn't know. So a little bit more prestige than Beverly Hills Polo Club. The sell-through numbers are still quite poor. In the pre-owned market, I don't think I've ever bothered. Claiborne, I find all of the time. It is a subsidiary of Liz Claiborne, or one of the lines of Liz Claiborne, which is itself a subline of Kate Spade, I believe. Another brand that you just see everywhere, and it all looks really terrible to me, and I don't sell it. Stafford is the house brand of JCPenney. It's really cheap stuff. It's mostly dress shirts, and I typically avoid it. They do make suits and blazers. You do find it new with tags from time to time, but if you just find the everyday pieces like the dress shirts, the crappy shirts, leave them. Perry Ellis is kind of a frustrating brand because Perry Ellis was a legitimate designer and a famous and a celebrated designer in the 80s, and you find a lot of vintage Perry Ellis, and I really want vintage Perry Ellis to be in demand and worth good money. It just unfortunately is not. And the contemporary stuff sells really poorly. It's not a completely terrible brand, but it's really not good, and my default is to pass on it. I see Joseph and FEISS quite often. I can only find Men's Warehouse online as a distributor of Joseph and FEISS clothing. There's some interesting history. It's a really old company. It was founded in 1841 in Ohio. and played some significant role in the history of clothing manufacturing processes. Now the resale market is pretty bad. I don't think that I've ever sold it. I doubt that I ever will. Even the vintage stuff, I looked up like vintage Joseph and FEISS, because you would think with that history there would be a pretty strong market for it, but there simply is not. Geoffrey BEENE, another clothing designer whose namesake clothing manufacturing company has diluted in quality and prestige. It's sold at Walmart, and everything that I said about the other brands applies here. It's not very high quality, and the demand is really low, and the sale prices are quite low. American Rag, another one like International Concepts that will trick you into thinking that maybe it's worth something because you find some interesting patterns, some interesting aesthetics. They make pearl snap shirts. They make, I think, some color blocked shirts, some kind of surf skate looking shirts. It wigs me out from time to time because it looks like it should be worth money and it almost never is. I have not picked this up since early in my career. I'm sure that you can pinpoint a couple pieces in there that are worth getting for really cheap, but typically I tend to just not even bother. So when should you bother to try to make money with these ass brands? There it is, I said it. Big and tall sizes can carry it over in demand and value to the point where you may want to invest a little bit of money in it. I would say as a rule of thumb, 2x. And bigger, really 3x and up is where the actual money is. Big and tall sizes are in more demand and you can ask a little bit more money for them. Big and tall sizes with modifiers on the size. So instead of 3XL, 3XB, so 3X big, meaning wider, or 3XT, or 3XLT, like 3XL tall, are less common even than the generic 3XL sizing pieces, and you can ask for even more money and they can be in even more demand. The stuff that you find, if you can find it for free or cheap, like if you find this stuff at the bins all the time, one strategy is to set it aside until you accumulate a whole bunch of it in a single size and sell it in a big lot. You can do this by brand. You can do this by a theme of brands. So you can take a bunch of different crap brands like some Stafford shirts, some MERONA shirts, and put it all together in one lot because they kind of fit an aesthetic or because they're all the same size, and sell it that way. You're not going to make a lot of money. Another time these brands might be worth it is if they are vintage. Certain brands do carry some kind of prestige with them in vintage form. If you find old tags, especially if they're really old, those can be worth some pretty good money because a lot of the time they will be made in the USA, or they'll be eye-catching, like clearly, conspicuously vintage. Those kinds of pieces you can sell online, and also consider selling those over the counter to buy-sell trade shops and vintage shops specifically, because there's a big appetite for that kind of clothing, especially if it does fit a certain aesthetic, like if it's a really vintage Hawaiian shirt or a bowling shirt. Something that looks really vintage can be worth some pretty good money. If you find it new with tags, especially if you can find it for, again, like less than a couple bucks, the resale market for new with tags, ass brands, especially the more common ones, can be okay. If you find pieces that are in line with kind of trendy aesthetics or buying patterns now or seasonality, that can carry it over the line. Cargo shorts is a good example. Swimwear during the summer, if you can get it for free or cheap, again, not to be redundant, can do pretty well. Or it just looks really, really weird. It has a bright pattern. It's like Aztec pattern. It has weird color blocking on it. It looks like the kind of thing that a teenager would want to wear. That can make it worth it. If you're really sharp with your keywords and you can market it to a specific buyer, I'm thinking here especially of fishing clothing. If you found, for example, a Croft & Barrow shirt that had the caped back with the mesh venting and the 2 chest pockets, if you market that as a fishing shirt, you stand a very good chance of flipping it for like maybe 15 bucks. If the piece is made with a higher quality fabric, I'm thinking here especially of cashmere but also linen, like 100% linen, or lamb's wool, like exotic wools, or if it's denim, like if it's a vintage denim MERONA piece, that would probably be worth it. The quality of the fabric itself will sell it over the brand. I've sold Kirkland, like I said. I've sold Club Room, which is, I think, a Macy's brand, which is another complete ass brand that I do sell when it's made of cashmere. If any of this stuff comes to you for free and it's in really excellent condition, then I would think about maybe investing the time to list it. It may not sell for very much, and it may not sell quickly at all. You may sit on it for a long time, but there is a good chance it will sell. When people say it will sell, everything on eBay eventually sells, I think that is a myth. I don't think that that's necessarily true. So you open yourself up to the possibility of wasting your time and energy listing something that nobody wants, no one will ever buy. If your photos are wizard, if you are excellent at writing descriptions, you're efficient, you're established, you really know what you're doing with selling clothing, and you have a process set up to where if you got a bunch of George Polo shirts, it wouldn't cut that deeply into your time to list them, or you have employees that do the stuff for you, then maybe then. Final scenario in which you should list this stuff is just if you want to. If you want to test it out, if you want the practice of listing something, if something in you just tells you that you have a shot at selling whatever it is, then do it and play around with those instincts and open yourself up to the possibility of being able to make money with this stuff, because there are no hard and fast rules. There's only kind of aerial view trends that you can observe in clothing reselling. But when it comes down to the wire, reselling is just an interaction between your listing and one person who is motivated for whatever reason to buy that thing that they're looking at. Maybe it's the first thing that they saw when they did a search on eBay. Maybe you promoted the hell out of the listing. Maybe there's just something about it that they want. It doesn't track to these general recommendations and sets of experiences and preferences that I've cultivated over years of reselling clothing. There's all kinds of opportunities to sell this stuff that breaks the rules. I tend to not break the rules anymore because they're my rules, and I've arrived at them over a lot of experience and a lot of frustration and wasted time. If you're a newer reseller, or if you're simply bored, or if you would simply get a kick out of selling a Faded Glory shirt because everybody says that you can't or shouldn't, then do it. Go for it. See what happens. I do think that you're better served looking for at least kind of middle-of-the-road brands to invest this money and time in. My preference by far is aiming for stuff like these Buck Masons that has really strong demand for it and healthy sales prices. And there's more of that than maybe you would think. If you want a guide to how to target those kinds of clothing items, in the description of the video, there's something called the Menswear Manifesto. It's 330 brands broken down by sell-through, broken down by price and category. It's free if you want it to be free. I made it pay what you want, so figure out what you want to give me for it and give me that, or come back later and buy it again, or buy me a coffee or something. Up to you. Hope it helps. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.